would be challenging to explain because it's always dark outside. In fact, the only place that isn't like that is possibly the Albert Hall. We may begin by stating that the story starts in the 1970s, which is why I enjoy it there. Excessive, wild, and unpredictable. While rock stars dominated the world, treachery and deceit were rampant behind the blaring crowds and dazzling lights. Imagine this. As decades of silence finally give way to an eruption of truths, one of the most revered guitarists of the day, Eric Clapton, sits quietly. In addition to providing us with iconic music, the 1970s also left a legacy of backstabbing, scandals, and feuds. The 6 people Clapton refers to as the worst liars of the decade are finally revealed today. Ginger Baker is the first name to emerge from the shadows. Imagine the tremendous intensity of Cream, the band that permanently altered rock, but there was a tempest of mistrust beneath that loud noise. Clapton recalls Baker as a brilliant drummer who, in order to maintain power, made up stories, manipulated circumstances, and spoke falsehoods. Baker's drumming was blazing on stage. He was turmoil and suspicion off stage. Rehearsals and tours were tainted by his paranoia, and his persistent plots caused the band's togetherness to break. The resentful silence in the dressing rooms replaced the laughter. There was more to the falsehoods than music. They extended into friendships, money, and unfulfilled promises so frequently that Clapton felt ensnared in a web of dishonesty. Egos were not the only factor in Cream's demise. Both revolutionary music and destructive betrayal were left behind as a result of one man's unrelenting struggle to twist the facts into his own interpretation of reality. Blind Faith and the second figure, Steve Winwood, emerged from the Cream's ashes. It was intended to be a dream project when Clapton teamed up with him. However, the reality was much darker beneath the glistening facade of a supergang. Winwood, who appeared to be composed and polished, concealed vulnerabilities and made commitment-related pledges that never came to pass. His grin conveyed a sense of solidarity. Silence has revealed uncertainty, Bo. The lies of allegiance became heavier every day, and rehearsals were chilly and characterized by hesitation rather than harmony. A tenuous relationship based on shifting sand was hidden behind the glitz of Blind Faith's creation. As Blind Faith's brief life came to an end, Clapton became aware that he had fallen victim to yet another delusion. Winwood had covered up his reservations with half-truths, leaving Clapton to pick up the ruins of a band that had fallen apart due to unfulfilled promises. The story then shifts to George Harrison, the third and possibly most agonizing character. Clapton's rivalry with Harrison was one of the most complex and acrimonious. They shared stages and wrote songs together, and to the outside world, they were pals. Beneath the grins, however, was a vicious war of falsehoods. There was more to the triangle involving Pattie Boyd than a straightforward romance. It was filled with unspoken betrayals, secret liaisons, and broken promises that were more painful than any guitar riff could make. I would ask myself, well, what did I do last year, knowing that I would be playing the next year? Something else has to be thought of. Changing a repertoire and changing personnel, you know. Harrison's inner manipulations contrasted sharply with his public persona as a spiritual, peace-loving leader. He was able to weave deceit in the shadows of his family life while preaching peace in the sunshine. Clapton witnessed directly how Harrison, even at the expense of his inner entourage, distorted the truth in order to preserve his reputation. Mornings of icy quiet could replace evenings of laughter. Their friendship hovered between sincere connection and toxic rivalry, with trust dissolving in the harsh light of reality. With lies stoking the flames at every turn, the pendulum swings between warmth and venom. Jeff Beck, the fourth person on Clapton's list, is the following name. The competition was at its fiercest here. Their famed guitar clashes are certainly familiar to you. Their duels enthralled audiences on stage. They were grins wrapped around daggers off stage. Beck's genius was indisputable, but so was his insatiable desire to outperform Clapton at every opportunity. Here, the lies had nothing to do with money or love. They have to do with reputation. The truth was twisted into weapons on the battlefield. Beck whispered into the ears of journalists and industry insiders, spreading rumors, exaggerating his accomplishments, and portraying himself as the better guitarist. Admiration was tainted by suspicion when Clapton's appreciation for Beck's unadulterated skill collided with the pain of betrayal. The two circled each other like predators for years, never sure if the next handshake held a secret blade, sometimes allies, sometimes enemies. There was more to their feud than guitars. It was about egos too big to share the same spotlight, pride, and dishonesty. Pete Townshend was the next in a line of letdowns. Their relationship started with admiration for one another. These two men were titans of British rock. However, there were many paradoxes in Townshend's universe. Because they combined friendliness with treachery, Clapton found Townshend's falsehoods to be the most upsetting. Collaboration pledges were broken. Crisis assistance never fully materialized. Additionally, tales were misrepresented to benefit Townshend. Clapton experienced the reality of being abandoned when he most needed him, despite the guitarist for The Who projecting allegiance to the public. He recalls evenings when Townshend would promise to support him through his addiction and desperation, only for those promises to vanish the following day. Excuses and distractions caused projects they had dreamed of jointly to fall apart. Clapton repeatedly found himself abandoned as the alleged brotherhood behind the curtain devolved into a show of how toss. Dishonesty and hubris broke a link that had the power to change history. And lastly, Keith Richards, the most hazardous of them all. Richards was the epitome of excess in the 1970s. He was seen by fans as the Rolling Stones' rebellious outlaw. He was viewed by Clapton as a skilled manipulator who created myths about himself while causing destruction in his wake. With a bottle in his palm and a smile on his face, Richards walked through the decade, concealing the price of his havoc while telling tales of his own invincibility. Women and drugs weren't the only topics of the lies. They were about loyalty, about making a pledge of unity one evening and then breaking it the next. Clapton was frequently drawn into Richards's late-night meetings and whispered assurances, only to see those same words perverted in the daylight. Richards had a friendly smile. Peddle stories to reporters or undermine competitors in the studio 1 minute, then stab you in the back the next. It appeared to be friendship between two guitar heroes to onlookers. It was a cruel game of survival inside. It was the most difficult pill for Clapton to take. That the unquenchable thirst for fame, notoriety, and survival in a cruel industry led to the abandonment of truth even among the closest of peers. Clapton views the 1970s as a decade of music with fragile roots after looking back at all six. The falsehoods weren't unique. They were strands of a wider web that ensnared everyone. Bands fell apart due to unfulfilled commitments. Reputations were formed by untrue rumors circulated in tabloids, and friendships broke down in smoky backstage hallways. Consider how record firms conceal scandals to maintain sales, managers fabricate lies to shield their stars, and musicians themselves inflate their allegiance while planning their next betrayal. The 1970s produced masterpieces. Behind them, however, were men who were at war with one another and themselves and were unable of speaking the truth, even to their brothers. Envy, addiction, and dishonesty thrived in the lengthy shadows thrown by every stage illuminated by dazzling spotlights. During that era, the fundamental fabric of rock was sewn together with strands of dishonesty that would eventually tear it apart. And glitz concealed frailty. Decades later, these truths still carry a great burden. Despite the ups and downs of Clapton's career, the wounds of betrayal still exist. Imagine this. A man who has performed on stages alongside legends, now standing by himself, removing the masks of his former companions. The recollections include smoke-filled hotel rooms, in addition to victories and soaring guitar solos. Backstage quarrels that broke out like thunder and evenings when friendships broke down due to dishonesty and arrogance. His journey and the history of rock and roll were both influenced by the lies of the 1970s. Moments of glory were transformed into bittersweet memories with each betrayal, leaving scars that could not be removed by cheers. There was also the pain of knowing that trust had been betrayed for each arena that sold out. It is those shadows that Clapton bears, the evidence that music was never the only factor in fame. It was about surviving in an environment of quiet, deceit, and ambition. The painful memory of the 6 biggest liars of an age that was never able to confront the truth endures as long as the songs do, reverberating from vinyl to streaming. The weight is ingrained in the history of rock and is not just personal. A reminder that the truth was frequently darker than the music ever allowed, even behind the glittering myths.